In terms of what I do with patients when I'm working with them, this is the practice that I actually do in session. And it is the embracing of discomfort. So embracing discomfort willingly is a striatal optimizing intervention. So it means that you're taking the very thing that seems to be the cost, and you're deliberately intending it and welcoming it.
Before we get started, if you enjoy these episodes, you might want to check out more at OptimalWork.com. Our website offers unique content, tools, and exercises to help you thrive at work and beyond. We have an in-depth masterclass covering our entire theory of growth, daily recommendations for personalized advice, and a platform to help groups and organizations learn and practice optimal work together. You can get a free trial at OptimalWork.com. Now let's start the episode. Hey, this is Sharif here with another episode of the Optimal Work podcast, run by Dr. Kevin Majors. Kevin, great to be back here with you again. It's been a long time.
Hey, Sharif. Yeah, thanks for having me back. It's great to be here.
Yeah, well, of course, we had to follow up on last week's episode on the septum and meaning and motivation and go to the next logical part of the brain and part of this new model that you've been working on to go to the striatum and effort and challenge.
That's right. Yeah, so we're due for the striatum today, I guess, right?
That's right. That's what we got to cover. I wanted to start, just kind of linking it back to the septum and meaning, because there's a lot about gratitude and loving kindness meditation and affective resonance and that sort of thing. And it struck me towards the end of the episode, but it was too late to ask a question about it, so I've been, sitting on this, which is, this seems to be a very different model from Stoicism, and which has kind of become popular in maybe the broader self-help world, with books like The Obstacle is the Way, and I think the Waking Up app has lots of meditations on Stoicism. So I wanted to get your thoughts on is what we're doing presenting an opposite approach to that kind of just do what's right no matter how it feels kind of thing?
Yeah, I think that the two critiques that I have picked up on of the Stoics over the years, the first is that they tend not to see the positive value of affective experience. So, and the other, which is closely related, is that they do not give a primacy to love. So now, insofar as those two things are true, then yeah, what we're presenting is in a way, if not the opposite, it's completely different. Because what we're talking about is, on the one hand, how love is the highest of ideals. And so it's the highest way of doing anything is to do it in a loving way. And then that doing something in a loving way becomes essentially every other ideal. Sometimes that means courage. Sometimes that's generosity or being caring. Love is also, you could say, the final end, right? Love is about ultimates. What do you love the most? What's the priority in your life? That everything else then gets oriented towards. So love has this sense that it's an ideal and it's a bond. So it shows us how to do things, and it's also the reason why we do things. So that love has to be central. And when we're talking about these engines of meaning and effort and attention, in fact, they run on love or they run on fear. So you have in the septum, the purpose mode, and you also have threat mode. And those are really the two different ultimate sources of behavior.
And it seems like a little bit of what's going on here is, I think the Stoics might like the striatum, the effort and challenge and the good action and that sort of thing. Whereas maybe being a little bit more skeptical of what we covered in the last episode, the Stoic would be. But the argument that you're making here is that the striatum really works best in coordination when it's following the lead of the septum. And I think there's a neuroscience behind that of which with the good tired, bad tired, the adenosine system, dynorphins, dopamine, all that plays into it, right? So So this is a real reason why to have the best actions, you want the best motivations.
That's exactly right. Because the kind of motivation you have will determine the kind of effort available to you. And as we'll get into, there's two kinds of effort. One is more free and the other is more automatic. And so which one you're in depends on what's dominating, love or fear.
Great. Well, maybe we should then dive into the striatum and the effort engine and what's going on there.
Yeah, so the striatum is located near the septum, very close to it, a little more lateral. So it's a little more, the septum is more midline, and then we're kind of going out laterally from the brain, from the midline of the brain. And so then you get to the striatum, and then at the very end, you have the cortex. So you can think of it, things being organized in that way, like a wedge. The striatum responds to the septum because that's essentially the origin of where it gets its dopamine from. It's through something called the ventral tegmental area, but essentially it's the septum. And when the septum is in this purpose-driven mode, then the striatum has abundant dopamine available for it. So it has a high dopamine way of operating and a low dopamine way of operating. And these are these two states. So if you're asking yourself, what does it feel like when my striatum is revving? What if it were to be maximally revving within me? We were talking about the septal resonance is, you can actually feel love or gratitude welling up in you. That felt affective experience is through the septum. But for the striatum, what it feels like instead is this readiness to exert effort. So it's a present willingness to carry out the task. It feels like a willingness to tolerate discomfort in the service of the goal that's highly valued. And it also feels like this determination to be very persistent in pursuing the goal. And so that sense is like of the striatum really revving up. It's kind of what goes into being diligent. Diligent is being quick to start, ready, wanting to see it through. So that's like what the striatum is like when it's really at its best. And so it's put into that state by being in what we call this purpose mode, because it gets its dopamine from ultimately the activity of the septum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this immediately reminded me of lifting weights, which you like to do now. I finally, after 7 years, convinced you to.
It's fantastic. Yeah.
But it's like the only reason why, you exert the effort to lift the weight is because there's some purpose. Now, ultimately, there's not, maybe the deepest purpose is not immediately there, which is just to lift a weight. But so you need to look for some kind of deeper reason to do it.
It certainly helps us to work better and to live better. So it actually is a real boost. Yeah.
Is the striatum involved in that kind of thing? Like if you go in and you want to lift weights and you say, is this really worth the effort and that ready willingness to do it?
Yeah. So the striatum is all about rewards or benefits and costs. And so it's always asking itself, is it worth the effort? You could say that the motto of the striatum is, in Spanish, vale la pena. So it is worthwhile. That's like saying, I'm going to determinedly go for it. So it's worth the cost. It's worth the effort. And but we should be, just to say real quick, rewards for the striatum are anything that you find meaningful, whether it's material or moral. So if it's something that you highly value, then that is going to be that's going to be experienced as rewarding in your striatum and will allow it to galvanize effort in the service of that. So you can ask them, well, how does the striatum know what actually is valuable? And it gets its input from three things. So the first is the septum, which is most proximate. The next is the amygdala, which is for detecting threats, which obviously is relevant if you have to exert effort to neutralize a threat. But then the most important is the medial prefrontal cortex. In a sense, that's where you are directing it consciously. That's where your beliefs and your commitments affect how your striatum values things. And so, but people might have a lot of clarity at that level, intellectual level. If they don't have much affective resonance, the actual amount of dopamine available to the striatum will be lessened. But in terms of determining what is a reward, those are the three things that determine. So it's the septum, the cortex, particularly the medial prefrontal cortex, and the amygdala.
And so the amygdala is going to be less relevant here as we're talking about work and engaging opportunities in work and being purpose-driven and completing tasks and stuff like that. So it's interesting, I guess, the interplay in the inputs between the cortex and the septum. So the idea is if you're working primarily out of a sense of duty or like, well, I really should do this, and you're kind of talking yourself into it in that way, that's going to be more the cortex. And while it might have an influence on the striatum, it's not going to give you that dopamine that will, like, I don't know how you would put that exactly, that motivates you. Or
Yeah, so you won't feel as much of this kind of ready willingness to dive in and do it, because that is really the high dopamine state. And dopamine is so linked. Now, the amygdala is more important in low dopamine states. So when threat mode, when your septum is in threat mode, it's going to also activate your amygdala. And your striatum is going to be operating then without the dopamine that comes from love and bonds, and instead will be motivated by fear. And then you're going to be much more likely to act in an automatic way. So the two ways then the striatum can operate are the high dopamine state and the low dopamine. In the high dopamine state, you experience it as free, willing, kind of deliberately chosen, creative, flexible, very tied actually to the cortex and to what you believe is right. So, and that what the cortex values is then, seen as actually rewarding. So all of that really matters for this in this high dopamine state. In the low dopamine state, you actually become more automated and you become insensitive to outcomes, like the results of your behavior. So this is a big problem then, because every bad habit, every vice goes through the striatum, particularly the dorsal shift of the striatum, where now it is just automated. Okay, now what's the benefit of automation in the striatum is that it takes less willing choice to activate a behavior once it's very highly learned, which is good because then you can actually focus on new behaviors you're trying to master, and the old ones, become more and more just automated. But the problem is with bad habits that it requires very little willingness and effort to kick off that whole sequence of the bad habit. So that's the problem that we end up facing. If we tend to have these low dopamine states, living from threat mode, and go about our work then in a more rote, mechanical way, that's actually going to mean that bad habits are more likely to also flourish, and it will take very little willingness to actually make them kick off.
So it's so the striatum is thinking in terms of, well, there's not, in this given task or the situation I face, there's not that much I can get from it, or there's not much purpose here. So I'm just going to go into a kind of energy saving mode. I don't want to expend that much energy, so I'll just do the automatic, the habitual. So if you want to develop a new habit, or if you want to be trying to do something in a new and better way, you would need to get this system going with dopamine from the septum.
Yeah. So in a high dopamine state, effort feels worthwhile and actually starts to feel effortless because the reward is anticipated and already felt in some way. And there's a felt sense of integrity between your action and the meaning. So you feel like all of this is lined up within me. So that's a wonderful state to be in. That's the state that we're in when we're in flow. It's a state of curiosity, of joy and striving. So all these things are actually originate in the striatum. Because if you talk about flow as effortless attention, well, clearly it's going to have a massive attentional component. We'll talk about that in the future. But the kicking off of it, where effort actually starts to get experienced as effortless, That's actually a high dopamine in the striatum. That's what that feels like. Um, in the other state, if you're in threat mode and now you're not giving dopamine to the striatum, you're going to actually have neurochemicals working against it, against dopamine. The buildup of type 2 adenosine, the number one. So you get that bad, tired feeling, which directly counteracts the ability of dopamine to work in the striatum. It's just amazing, but the type 2 adenosine receptor and the dopamine receptor are tied together. And if you start having type 2 adenosine, the bad tired, it just blocks the ability of dopamine to bind, which is going to then make all effort feel even more costly. All work will feel more like drudgery. Trying to do new things will feel hard or impossible. So there's this shift in your experience of effort as a result of type 2 adenosine overload. And it's the exact same with dynorphins. So the more then punishing and intolerable things feel, then the more dynorphins you have. And dynorphins, like one of the major centers of all dynorphin activity in the brain is the striatum. So, and that has, again, an anti-dopamine effect in the striatum. So the more unwilling you are to experience something, the more automatically behaviors kick in to avoid it. That's all striatal. Because the unwillingness and the kicking in of the automated avoidance, that's all the same thing. That's the work of the dorsal striatum. Even cortisol has this effect in the striatum. So you see this exquisite sensitivity between what happens when you have, on the one hand, drudgery and distaste and procrastination. Procrastination is actually a striatal phenomenon. The cost of effort is getting somehow overweighted. And the meaning, which is the reward of the action, is being discounted. So then we put it off. That's very much, the striatal analysis is always about cost and benefit. And so procrastination could be seen as like the antithesis of the ready willingness to dive in and embrace discomfort. So those are like the two separate kind of experiences of these two very different states of the striatum.
Before we continue, a brief message. If you're benefiting from these discussions, please take a moment to hit like and subscribe. Doing so helps us to reach more people. So you're not just learning, you're also helping others to discover a path of growth and flourishing. Thanks for your support. It seems like when the striatum is trying to save energy, I guess I'm putting it that way. I'm not sure if you 100% endorse that phrasing, but then we tend to do things like work without taking breaks or scroll on the phone for extended periods of time, these kind of like automated behaviors. But those aren't really energy saving, right? I mean, that's, as we've discussed, you've mentioned many times in this series, to work without breaks is like one of the big causes of tiredness and fatigue. And then also scrolling, it doesn't actually restore you at all, which I think we all know. Yeah, what's up? Why is that? Why is it that when the striatum tries to give you these kind of automated behaviors to save energy, it's actually costing more energy, at least maybe in the long run or something?
Well, yeah, it can cost energy if it's interfering with your ability to have replenishing breaks, for instance. But it also raises the perceived cost of effort, because novelty will seem like a waste of energy. But in fact, trying to do things in a new and better way is reinvigorating because it gives you more dopamine. Trying to like think about the meaning of why you're doing something and put more love into it could feel like it's more energy, but it's actually more dopamine. And when you have high dopamine, the cost then, you're willingly able to embrace it. And then the effort gets lighter and lighter and lighter. So we want to live actually in a way that maximizes striatal dopamine. And in a way, that's every good habit allows us to do that. But as I was saying before, I think there's this quality of the striatum, which is intensity of effort. The ability to like be completely committing all of your effort to the task at hand. So I think that the septum is more about order, which is, what is this task ordered to? Yeah, and the striatum is more about intensity. Like, can I put 100% of my effort into this task? So it'd be good for us just to go through then, like, the best practices for the striatum. Because each of these, because it's going to be they're on the side of maintaining high dopamine, they're actually on the side of free, creative, intelligent effort versus a more mindless, automated effort of the habit. And even when we have good habits, we always are going to be dipping back into ways of improving them even more and optimizing them. So that keeps on tying them into something that's new and free and creative. So we never totally go all into mindless automation, no matter what. That's never the goal.
Right. So in terms of these practices to keep the striatum purpose-driven, where do you want to start?
So we've already covered the most important, which is the septum. So getting meaning online. It can help to have ways of reminding yourself during the task of what the meaning is. So we do this when people do a golden hour in OptimalWork. We try to have who benefits and their intention here as always there, so that as people are checking off a step, they're also able to replenish that sense of meaning. So that's the first thing, and really I would say the most important. The other really important one is sprints and breaks. That it's a formula. Marathons are a formula for burnout. Long periods of work without breaks ends up tipping the striatum into type 2 dominance. So you have this adenosine signal of bad tired that now predominates. And then everything feels harder. The costs of effort seem to soar, and the rewards feel more distant. So it's really important that people try to honor the 90-minute limit to work. There's some indication it could be 120 minutes for some people. So again, each person has to like determine for themselves what is, what's for them. And to do that, you have to learn to monitor fatigue. Okay, so if you start to feel like you're drifting into autopilot while working, or that somehow there's less sense of intelligence and innovation, you can tell that you're tiring out, it might be time then to take a break. If you can maintain this intelligent and free and creative effort for the whole 2 hours, then great. Okay, it sounds like things are still going well. But I would say for most people, 90 minutes is a good rule of thumb. And then take ideally something like a 15-minute break. Now, in the literature, it's between 10 to 20 minutes. So I say 15 because it's in the middle. Some people seem to reset on 10 minutes. Maybe it has to do with the kind of work you're doing and how fatigued you got. So if it's really intense work, very fatiguing, you might need a 20-minute break. So that's a good time to go for a walk. Get outside, get bright light, movement, planks, deadlifts, squats, to do like brief things that you can do without changing clothes. Just 10 reps is enough to help. Basically, all the astrocytes are going to start sucking up all the adenosine to clear it away so that the next time at work starts fresh. Another really important item that we also talk a lot about in OptimalWork is steps. For your striatum, a step is a win. And wins replenish your dopamine because you're making progress toward a valued goal. So it is a way, it's a way of continually replenishing dopamine as you go through things. You check off steps as you go through. So it's always good to have at least a couple steps so you have a sense of a trajectory. But it's interesting that actually has been proven to increase septal dopamine, that just to have things that you check off as you do them. But those are micro wins. So, and they help you to maintain momentum in the task.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's also helpful to have, so you have steps at, 10, 15 minutes, and then as you're working through the golden hour, you might, you complete a step, you get a little win, you get a little dopamine, and then you work on to the next step. But then also that there's a sense of what is this golden hour about? Like especially if it's working on a bigger project, like if you have a whole paper you're working on or a whole presentation or a big coding project, that you say, okay, well, what is this golden hour about? It's not just 5 random steps added together, but I'm actually trying to complete this part of the project that has a nice boundary to it and is something that you look forward to completing and is something that you can celebrate when you do finish the hour. I've always found that helpful.
Yeah, no, it does. It certainly keeps the balance to your effort being more free and your work feeling actually more rewarding and effortless.
Is that it? Or in terms of the strategies for working with the striatum effectively?
Well, I think there's like the one overarching one, which I haven't really gone deeply into. But in terms of what I do with patients when I'm working with them, this is the practice that I actually do in session. And it is the embracing of discomfort. So embracing discomfort willingly is a striatal optimizing intervention. So it means that you're taking the very thing that seems to be the cost and you're deliberately intending it and welcoming it. So discomfort is oftentimes what puts people into automated avoidance. So discomfort could function like a no-go signal. Like, as soon as something is uncomfortable, I'm going to stop. Or discomfort could actually be experienced as a growth signal. This is precisely where I'm being stretched. So this is where my most important growth lies. And the more unwilling someone is to experience the discomfort, the more rewarding it is for the striatum that they learn to embrace it. And so this has to do with what we had talked about in the past of opponent process theory. But so say a person is really afraid of the emotion of regret or anxiety or tiredness. If you can bring it on in some way in the session so that they have their habitual unwillingness to feel it, but then they catch themselves and they learn to welcome the discomfort of the feeling, to try to savor the feeling as much as they can, and even to somehow link it to love. That willingness exercise is actually a striatal exercise. Because in your striatum, discomfort marks a kind of border of growth. And if you are seeing that purely as a cost, it kind of shuts down growth opportunities. But if you can see the discomfort as the threshold of growth instead, that this is actually what you have to pass through, then it's an encouraging signal. And once that discomfort becomes itself encouraging, people are off to the races. They're doing extremely well because the very thing that was the obstacle actually now becomes the way. Isn't that a Ryan Holiday book?
Which I mentioned at the beginning of this episode.
Exactly. the obstacle is the way.
Stoicism. Yeah.
So the Stoics, they did get the striatum right. But embracing discomfort really is the master practice. It's what overcomes procrastination. It's what gets you into that state of ready willingness, where now I'm ready to begin. And whatever would seem to be the most aversive element, that's one of the greatest dynorphin signal, that's precisely where you get the biggest bounce from practicing it. And if you get through that first dynorphin dip, you will always get the dopamine bounce. It will feel like a real victory. So that's a great thing to look for. A challenge that produces a stretch that gives you that signal, right? Because you're only going to really galvanize all of your ability to put effort into a task if there's a challenge in it, a meaningful challenge that makes you willing, makes it worthwhile, so that your striatum can actually say "Vale la pena."
Wonderful. Well, Kevin, I think that's a perfect note for us to end on here today.
All right, Sharif. See you next time.
All right. Yeah. Thanks so much. We'll be back. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. If you enjoyed our conversation and you're looking for more in-depth guidance, check out OptimalWork.com, our unique platform that delivers content, tools, and exercises to help you thrive at work and beyond.